Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today. I have a nice little pastel pied girl that just got done getting out of quarantine today that I got from Twisted Reptile back at the Rochester Expo in the fall last year. And she's going to be my little co-host today as we actually talk about quarantining and why it's important, when you should be quarantining, for how long, and I'm going to kind of show you an example of a quarantine setup. So stick around. I'm Jack. This is Python Addiction. Thanks for joining me today. So we're going to jump right into today's topic. Number one, importance. In general, we all know what quarantining is, and in general, why it's important to quarantine to help stop the spread of things. But why is it important when it comes to our reptiles? It's really actually important for any animals that we have, be it reptiles, dogs, cats, birds, you name it. You should always be practicing a quarantine process if you're introducing new animals to an environment where there's already animals there. So the importance is to help stop the spread of different things. When it comes to snakes, which is going to be our focus today, one of the big things that we're focused on is making sure that there are no mites. And along with that, as you look at things, are things like nidovirus, or what's known as IBD, or inclusionary body disease, in boas, are just a few different diseases or pathogens or things that can go around in some of the reptile community. There's other pathogens and funguses and things like that as well as you get into the broader reptile group. But again, we're specifically sticking more with snakes today. So the importance is to make sure that we make sure the animal that we're bringing in is healthy. When do you want to quarantine? Anytime you're introducing a new animal. And that is regardless of where you get it from. I got this from a breeder that I know and I trust. Still doesn't matter. Still went through quarantine the same as any other animal that I would get in. As I go through a little bit more of a in-depth quarantining process than some people might do, and that's my preference because I want to make sure for the safety of all of my animals. But we'll get into that in just a minute as far as how long. The other things when you want to quarantine, if you're going to a show and getting a new animal, you're quarantining. When I have the animals that I bring to shows to show off for sale, everything that comes back into the house after the show that I didn't sell goes into its own area, its own rack, and doesn't have access to the rest of my collection until I'm done show season. And then quarantine actually begins for the countdown, so to speak. And that's to make sure, because you can pick up anything at a show, even though 99.9% of the breeders are trustworthy and don't have mites or anything like that. You never know when it comes to that, or you can't tell when it comes to the people that come to the show. Person A could hold one of my snakes, and then person B holds it, then person C. And that's one of the reasons why I don't allow people to hold my animals unless they're actually intending on purchasing them, unless I bring a ambassador animal with me to that particular show, and then that's the only one that's actually being handled. And that's my boy Kratos, my cameraman. Here's his picture again. he goes to some of my shows, and he's kind of one of my ambassadors, as he has no issues with being handled and everything like that. But he'll go through a quarantining process every single time to make sure that he comes back home clean. He's being handled by lots of different people. So I make sure to go the extra mile when it comes to making sure that he's safe and healthy. So that's when you want to quarantine. You want to quarantine whenever you're bringing animals out and there's potential exposure, and when you're bringing new animals in that you have zero idea of where they came from and no idea to the environmental conditions from point A to point B and everything like that. And this is up to you. This isn't up to me or up to any one person, to as there's no quote established guideline as to how you want to interpret things. It's what you want to interpret it as, how you want to set things up. So keep that in mind. When it comes to how to actually do the quarantining itself, here's a little walkthrough here of a quarantine setup that I actually have going on right now for a snake that came back to me because she was not eating. And making sure that she's established she's perfectly healthy, perfectly fine. The very first time I offered her food, she ate right away. So I just think that it was some type of an environmental setup of some sort or something with her new owner that I'll have to figure out and get established and nail down before she goes back home. But because she came back from an outside environment, she's in quarantine. But as you see, I have for this, I have a thermostat, I have the heating mat, very Spartan enclosure setup with just the paper towel, a water bowl, a hide, and I do have one of the Govee thermostats in there just to make sure that I'm keeping temperatures and everything for humidity in the optimal ranges and that she stays healthy while she's in there. But that's a quarantine setup. It'll help me to make sure that she doesn't have mites. It'll make sure that when she does poop and pee that I can make sure that she's doing that perfectly fine and it's all healthy looking. So I'm keeping track of those types of things. It gives me a little bit more because it's a confined area. As you can see, that was just like a little 18-quart tub. I can keep the environment very well regulated in that tub without much of a problem whatsoever. And that's in a completely segregated area of my house in a completely separate room. So it's all off to the side. So that's one of the things when you're quarantining, you want to make sure that you're quarantining in a completely different room. And that's actually one of the reasons why I'm going through the process now of actually building out a new reptile room for myself so I can further close off all of my reptiles into one area so I can set up and establish a little bit more of a permanent area for quarantining and everything like that elsewhere in my house. Because I don't have multiple levels for a home. Everything is all on one floor. So it's finding room and space to do a quarantine in an area that I'm not going to regularly walk through or visit if I'm going to be going into my reptile room at the same time. The next question that people are going to have when it comes to things is, how long? Well, we quarantine for both the concept of viruses and pathogens as well as mites. The life cycle of the average snake mite is approximately 45 days from birth to death. So my suggestion, regardless of if you see mites or if you don't see mites when you first get an animal, and again, we're talking more specifically snakes for this particular video, you should quarantine for a minimum of 60 days. And the reason why I say 60 days is that guarantees that you're covering the entire lifespan of the mite. So if one gets by you and lays eggs, you might not see anything because you can't see the eggs with your naked eye. It's impossible to see them just with your eyes. So if one gets by you and happens to be a female and lays eggs, it'll be another 10 to 15 days. Those eggs will hatch. They have to start feeding. You're not going to start actually seeing adults, and a female can lay 40 to 50 eggs. So you're not going to see adults for like 15, 20 days, 30 days. And that's why it's so important to make sure, because you could go from day 0 to day 30 and not see an adult or even some of the babies, and then day 31 they're all there. They've all hatched, they've all started engorging themselves, and you have mites. So that's why I always suggest, number one, doing a 60-day quarantine. And during that quarantining process, use something like the reptile spray from Natural Chemistry, or give a regular Dawn dish soap and warm water soak for 30 or 40 minutes every few days as an additional preventative to make sure that you're disrupting that life cycle for the mite. One of the other things that I do, and not everyone does this, and this is where I'm going to suggest at least the minimum of 3 months for a quarantine period, is I go through and I do testing for both nidovirus and for IBD for anything that comes in that's going to be in my collection. So even like this girl, it's a way for me to certify for myself that they're coming in clean, that they don't have anything. And if it's a baby like this, I'll only do one test because they haven't generally been alive long enough to where if they're not showing symptoms already because of how with them being smaller, their immune system is not the same as an adult snake. I'll do the test once. I won't do a confirmatory test. And if it's an adult or an older snake that comes in, or like when I did my entire collection a couple of years ago, that was, I did the test and then I waited 6 months to do that confirmatory test to get a double negative to make sure that everything was free of those ailments. But that's another thing you want to consider when you're doing quarantining. Running all of your tests. If you have bearded dragons or other animals that might have fungal issues or something that could travel, having those types of testing and everything done while they're in quarantine is one of the best times to get those tests done and get those negative results. So if you're bringing them into a space to where you have your collection, you're not accidentally exposing everything after the fact. One of the other things that I do for quarantine is making sure that there's no cross-contamination of anything that I'm offering for food. because some of these viruses and stuff like that can transfer from things like saliva or whatnot. So if I'm offering, say she was in quarantine, if I offered her a frozen thawed mouse and she refused it, I would discard it. I would throw it away. I would not offer it to another animal because there's that potential, there's that risk of there being something that has not been tested yet or whatnot that could transfer onto that rodent, and then I'm bringing that, which is from a quarantined area, into my collection if I'm feeding it off to something else, even another animal that's in quarantine. I'm risking cross contaminating things that way. So it's important, even though some people think that things like nidovirus won't happen to them, it's better to be safe than sorry. And you can go through RAL for the testing. It's not overly expensive if you have a smaller collection. You're only looking at like $25 per test, plus the overnighting fee and everything to get it there. So it's like a vet visit essentially for the cost of doing the test. It's not cost prohibitive in the long run to ensure the safety of your animals. For somebody like me, it cost me thousands because I had to do all of my collection not once but twice in order to get that baseline for my entire collection. So if you have a larger collection, it can become very cost prohibitive very quickly, type of thing. And so I can understand in some cases, but if you're newer to the ball python industry or newer to the reptile hobby, going through, you can always establish and get the testing done with your vet if you don't want to do it yourself. I find it that it's a little bit cheaper doing it yourself because most of the time the vets have to send them off to get tested or for the labs to be run through a lab like RAL to begin with. So it's easier to just do it yourself. My process, my thoughts. And then the last thing that I wanted to run by is a few tips and a few things to take into consideration when it comes to your reptiles, you owning them. Say you're not bringing anything in and you're just going to a reptile show or to a reptile shop, making sure that when you get home, change, take a shower before you go anywhere near any of your reptiles, because you never know what you can pick up while you're at that show or you're at that shop. And those are little things that you can do on top of the concept of quarantining in general. And that's one of the other things that you should be doing when you're entering or exiting your quarantine zone, is you should be making sure to change your shirt, use hand sanitizer, and kind of scrub yourself down, so to speak, before you exit. And if you're planning at all to go right into your reptile room, it's a good thing to shower and change completely before you go in there, just to be safe. And that's what all of the whole discussion today is all about, is safety for your reptiles that you already have, making sure that the animal that you're bringing in is safe and healthy. And that's the whole process of doing it. It's a lot easier if something is quarantined and not already in your collection to deal with one problem than to have to deal with multiple at the same time. So if you like today's video, please do hit that like button, as that lets me know that you like this type of content. And as usual, if you have made it this far through the video and you haven't subscribed already, please do hit that subscription button and then click that notification icon as well, so you can get notified of new videos when I put them out. I tend to put out a new video every Monday. But until next time, I'm Jack, and this baby girl does not have a name yet, so if you have suggestions, drop them in the comments below. But we'll call her Nameless until she comes up with a name. But until next time, I love you guys.